Today, we're diving into a really provocative idea: the concept that modern boys are living life on what some are calling tutorial mode. We're going to break down what that means, where the argument comes from, and what it's all about, based on a recent analysis. So, what is tutorial mode? Well, the source defines it as this cultural environment where the expectations for boys have been set incredibly low, but at the same time, the praise and rewards they get are still super high. It's this mismatch that's at the heart of the entire argument we're exploring today. To really get a grip on this idea, we kind of have to look back. This first section is all about the historical context that, according to the source, set the stage for this tutorial mode life. The analysis really zeroes in on a dramatic shift in expectations. For generations, becoming a man was defined by some pretty tough stuff: war, hard labor, strict discipline, and this massive responsibility to provide. But the argument today is that those pressures have been almost completely replaced by things like comfort, safety, and a world where that provider role is now basically optional. Okay, so that's the big picture. But where do you actually see this tutorial mode play out in daily life? Well, the source starts by looking at the home, in a section it calls the coddling divide. The argument really kicks off by looking at parenting dynamics. It suggests that boys are often protected from discomfort, kind of shielded from the hard knocks, while their sisters are raised to be self-reliant. This sets up two totally different paths in life, right from the very beginning. And wow, this quote just lays it all out there, doesn't it? It's a really blunt summary of the whole argument, that our culture actively pushes one gender towards maturity while protecting the other from it completely. And what happens is, these different expectations create two totally different internal scripts. For girls, the message they absorb is all about endurance, about being resilient. For boys, the message is that they are something precious that needs to be protected. Okay, so we've seen what's happening in the home. Now let's zoom out and look at society as a whole, and what the source calls the double standard of achievement. So the source then lays out this pretty long list of all the things girls are expected to be. They need to mature fast, do great in school, manage their emotions, be empathetic, the whole 9 yards. But the key point here is that these aren't seen as amazing achievements. They're just considered the baseline, just normal. And here's where the contrast gets really stark. According to the source, for the exact same baseline behavior, just staying out of trouble, a boy is told he's doing great. For a girl, it's just normal. And this line just sums up the whole argument. This is what the source calls the real, unspoken double standard. The idea isn't just that we have different expectations, but that we're basically using two completely different scales to measure success for boys and girls. All right, next up, we're diving into the emotional side of things, how we perceive and react to emotional expression, which, according to this analysis, is a whole other can of worms. The analysis points at something pretty striking. How we see emotions seems to totally depend on who's showing them. I mean, think about it. The exact same act, a teenager crying, is apparently viewed completely differently. A girl crying is often dismissed as being dramatic or manipulative, but a boy crying, that's seen as this profound, brave moment of real trauma. And that different perception, it leads to a totally different reaction from the world around them. The source claims that a boy's pain triggers a sort of rescue mission. He's taken seriously. But a girl's pain is often trivialized, with this unspoken expectation that she just needs to handle it on her own, quietly. But it doesn't stop with just feelings. The source points to this really weird, kind of contradictory idea about competence. It's the notion that boys are treated as if they're both more fragile and more brilliant than girls, all at the same time. So what you end up with, according to this argument, is this strange situation where boys get to be both the delicate prince who needs protecting and the natural-born leader whose competence is just assumed from the get-go. Okay, get ready, because this is where the argument takes a really big, kind of counterintuitive turn. It tackles the role of feminism in all of this head-on. So, here's the twist. The source argues that feminism, the very movement that's often blamed for the problems facing boys today, is actually what freed them from those old, rigid, and frankly brutal expectations of traditional masculinity. The pressure to be the sole provider, to never show emotion, all of that. And that, according to the analysis, is the ultimate irony of the whole situation. Many of the people who benefit most from this new freedom and softness are the ones who frame themselves as victims of the very cultural shift that made it all possible. All right, so let's tie all of this together. What's the final takeaway from this whole tutorial mode idea? What's the bottom line? The argument is that this environment itself is the core issue, not boys. It's a world where, the source claims, the difficulty setting has been turned way, way down. And this creates a massive contrast with what it calls the hard mode that their female peers are basically forced to play on. And this is really the core thesis of the whole thing. It's about flipping our understanding of the gender gap on its head. The source argues that the biggest gap we face today isn't about opportunity. It's about the fundamentally different standards we hold for boys and girls. And that's the big question this analysis leaves us with. It shifts the entire conversation. The core question becomes, what would actually change if we started right there? What happens if we level the playing field of expectation?